So are we live? Should I begin?
Well, we are going live now.
But the broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, I'm Grover Joseph Reese, and this is the session of Vietnam Advocacy Day, which will focus on international mechanisms and sanctions regimes for dealing with human rights and problems of human rights violations, and particularly on religious freedom. We have three excellent panelists for this presentation for the first hour. First hour will be in English with questions in Vietnamese and English later. And the three panelists are Dr. Ahmed Shahid, who has a very distinguished record and a record not only as a professional, not only as a diplomat and an academic, but also as a fighter for religious freedom. He currently serves as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief. He has served as foreign minister of his country, the Maldives, as well as a professor in the UK and elsewhere. And he is, when those of us who are fighting on the front lines think of who might be able to help with a particularly awful problem that's happening somewhere in the world, including Vietnam, where he's been very helpful, he's probably the first person you think of. And we're very happy to have Dr. Shahid. We also have Desi Hanara, who is from Indonesia. Her university education was in Egypt and in the UK. She's a trained lawyer. She's worked in the NGO world and also in the government and intergovernment world for a long time, which means she started when she was 9. And she is she's currently the director. She's the Southeast Regional Director of International Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and has a similar post with the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. And we're very much looking forward to her presentation. We also have Greg Mitchell, who is president of the Mitchell firm, which specializes in public affairs in Washington, D.C. He's a former senior congressional staff member. He has worked in this area for a long time, and importantly, he is a co-founder and the managing coordinator of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, which is one of the important issues, one of the important mechanisms that we're going to discuss today. I also read on Greg's bio that he had a distinguished career as a Bill Clinton impersonator at one time. I don't know if that will come up, but I'm looking forward to it someday, if not today. So thank you all to all of our panelists. We're going to ask the panelists to speak in the order in which I've described. And so we will start with Dr. Shahid.
Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador Rees, for that very generous introduction. I'm grateful to Dr. Thang and the BPSOS for inviting me to join the Vietnam Advocacy Day 2020 activities via today's discussion on human rights, mechanisms, and sanctions. Hello also to my fellow co-panelists and to everyone joining us this morning. I want to begin by commending the BPSOS for its excellent and energetic work on addressing human rights issues and promoting the empowerment of people to achieve their fundamental rights. In the context of today's theme, I have been asked to talk about my work as UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, including on how I engage with various UN human rights mechanisms, and of course, finally to share my reflections on the situation of religious freedom in Vietnam. The UN's human rights mechanisms generally fall into two groups: those bodies that have been set up or are set up by a specific human rights treaty to which states voluntarily sign up to, and there are 10 such bodies, and they derive their authority from the specific treaty upon which it has been found. Vietnam has signed up to 7 such treaties and gets reviewed by these bodies periodically, including by the Human Rights Committee less than 2 years ago. The second group of human rights mechanisms are far more diverse and comprise bodies like the Human Rights Council and its affiliated Universal Periodic Review, made up of state representatives, and of course those made up of UN bureaucrats such as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and then finally independent experts who comprise over 80 individuals covering specific human rights issues or country situations. I am one of the latter 80. States do not have to sign up to these bodies. They draw their mandate and authority from the UN's Charter. Now, this grouping of the treaty bodies and charter bodies is the standard view. Though in recent years, given the extensive work on mainstreaming human rights in all areas of UN's work, and with the growing recognition that human rights, development, and peace and security are interlinked, the metaphor of human rights mainland and archipelago has become more appropriate, with all the core human rights mechanisms comprised in the mainland of human rights and various UN's developmental agencies and functional organizations, including UNESCO and the UNHCR, seen as human rights archipelagos, given the important role human rights play in their work as well. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, with its commitment to leaving no one behind, and other commitments to human rights in the agenda, drive home this important point. Human rights work and other work of the UN cannot be seen to be done in silos, but as offering important and numerous synergies that can and should be utilized. The standard view also ignores some of the most important actors in the field of human rights, including the BPSOS, the role of civil society, and also in a large number of countries, national human rights institutions in many countries which are quite independent of government authority. When talking about the human rights landscape, we must therefore include all these actors and stakeholders. This comprehensive view is important given that international human rights mechanisms lack coercive capacity or the power of reciprocity that other international law regimes, such as, say, trade law, possesses through reciprocal measures to enforce compliance of their provisions. So what do we have to promote human rights standards? Clearly, there is much evidence that improvements do occur, even if they are fine few, and also in very limited circumstances. One metaphor used to envisage how the system works is that used by Tom Pegram, that of human rights orchestration. He sees the role of the UN OHCHR, for example, is to mobilize various international and domestic actors to exercise their roles in the country-focused works as an orchestra, or playing their separate pieces on sections together. This can include, therefore, those who document rights violations, those who monitor trends of rights compliance and violations, those who bargain with governments to improve their performance and record, those who engage with domestic actors and allies to build capacity and to mobilize them, also to expose perpetrators using development and foreign policy interventions as appropriate. Also including, of course, using legal measures where possible and necessary, including, of course, targeted sanctions. So there's a whole range of measures that can be used. But orchestration requires, therefore, all parts of the orchestra to develop their full capacity and to have their activities in some fashion coordinated, so all can operate in tandem or in some unison or in some sort of synergy. As UN Special Rapporteur, I am only one actor in a field of numerous actors. But because I have a UN mandate, there are some things that I can do that can contribute to the work of the whole, even if in a very minor fashion. Just to clarify, I am not a UN official, but an independent person engaged by the Human Rights Council to monitor global trends in regard to respect for freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, and of course to work with all actors promoting this work. My mandate has 3 pillars of work. One, of course, is the communications, the letters of appeal and allegation or press statements that focus on different state actors and activities. The second is thematic reports, which I produced for the UN to look at different issues around the world. And finally, the country visits, which can be very effective and useful in regard to specific situations that require attention. Now, my predecessor, Professor Heiner Bielefeld, had been to Vietnam about 6 years ago on a country visit. And of course, because Vietnam doesn't have a standing invitation to special procedures, it becomes difficult to access the country on a regular basis. In addition, of course, to country visits and letters of appeal, when there are resources, I also organize workshops, consultations, and conferences to highlight concerns about this subject and mobilize actors, and also like this afternoon, participate in events organized by civil society actors and also by states. Within the UN mechanisms, I interact with other special rapporteurs and jointly raise concerns about violations of other countries, including, of course, in the case of Vietnam. Most communications today go as joint appeals or joint letters rather than as single letters for mandate, because I think the more of us join on a particular issue, the more weight we carry as rapporteurs. We also often brief states ahead of the Universal Periodic Review, highlighting concerns they might consider raising in the review, and treaty bodies ahead of their periodic reviews. For example, the last time Human Rights Committee reviewed Vietnam, the committee had before it the report of the last visit by the mandate to the country, and you will see in the concluding observations of the committee endorsed the recommendations of the rapporteur and calls on Vietnam to implement those measures in full. My mandate also continues to raise concerns about FOB violations, harassment, intimidation of human rights defenders, and those who work to promote FOB rights, and also work with others who seek to promote the same rights for everyone. Within the UN system, I also report on reprisals against human rights defenders, who is the focal point in the UN Secretariat on this subject. Externally, I interact with a growing number of special envoys that states have appointed, as well as parliamentarians who are increasingly working in this field, a number of other organizations, including the European Union, the OSCE where relevant, and of course a whole range of faith-based actors and civil society actors. Finally, on the situation of religious freedom in Vietnam, I hate to say it remains pretty much the same as observed by my predecessor who was there 6 years ago. He said in his report, the litmus test, the litmus test for improving religious freedom in Vietnam was the ability of unregistered religious organizations to function peacefully and freely. As we well know, this hasn't happened yet. The law that came into effect 2 years back perhaps does make some improvements to those who have been registered, but it throws into limbo or into a catch-22 situation for those who are unregistered. They cannot function until they're registered, and they can be registered until they function at least 5 years. And of course, the requirements for registration are so burdensome that it really operates not to streamline and make life more convenient for those who wish to register, but impose barriers for registration. So that's one of the main concerns we have with Vietnam. Beyond that, again, as the National Human Rights Committee notes in its review, the use of overly broad laws, especially those that focus on national security and those that seek to protect the moral fabric of society, very vaguely worded laws, but used to little effect to suppress rights of religious minorities in the country. Beyond that, of course, there are attacks by various civil society actors on Christians are particularly targeted in this situation, including attacks on their property, attacks on persons, intimidation, harassment, straight outright persecution, as well as, of course, societal hate speech towards them as well. I receive these reports quite regularly, and I raise them with the government concern. The response rate isn't great, but I do believe that by raising these concerns regularly, by working with other actors in the field, that there is an important thing that we all need to do. And as the latest USERF report highlights, Vietnam continues to be a country of particular concern to USERF. And it's important because with the growing US-Vietnamese if you like, mutual interests and contacts, there is scope for the USERF to be effective in ensuring that the US government policies do focus on demanding that there's improvement in this area. Now, one good thing here, of course, is that Vietnam ranks in the middle range of countries in the ASEAN region for engagement with UN mechanisms. It has signed up to 10 UN treaties, 7 key documents, and 2 optional protocols. I think we need to push for more in this area by asking Vietnam actually to sign up to the optional protocol to the human rights, to the ICCPR, to enable individuals to raise concerns with the Human Rights Committee. But more than that, to continue to document and report on violations and work together to build capacity of actors in the country and to network collectively to become of greater weight in this area. I also think it's important that the governments of the United States and others in EU are appointing rapporteurs in this field with whom we need to work with to ensure that even foreign policy area, there's more focus on respecting this freedom in Vietnam. Thank you very much. I shall end there and look forward to hearing my co-panelists and also any questions and comments the audience might have. Thank you again.
Dr. Shahid, and thank you so very much for the wonderful work that you do. We will now proceed to the presentation by Desi Hanara. Are you? I think your microphone is muted. Can you unmute your microphone?
Sure. Am I showing the presentation?
You're showing your screen with a mountainous background and lots of icons. Okay, now we are seeing the chart on the ASEAN Intergovernmental. Perhaps you could. There we go. Now we see it.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Glover, for the generous introduction. Honorable panelists, Dr. Ahmad Shahid and Greg Mitchell, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights and the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, we would like to extend our gratitude to the organizer, especially Dr. Tang. We are very grateful to be part of this important event. I was requested to review the ASEAN mechanisms and entity relevant to freedom of religion or belief, and primarily the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights as an overarching institution on human rights in ASEAN. I will also showcase key activities, advocacy, and achievements of our joint project with the IPP4, notably our recent series of advocacy on FORB in Vietnam. Finally, I will also share some insights from recent movement of Indonesia CFOP network and explore ideas for our future advocacy in Vietnam. So these are the key ASEAN mechanism and entity relevant to freedom of religion or belief. The ICHA has a very specific mandate on freedom of religion or belief under Article 22 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, as you can see in the screen. ACWC has a general mandate on the protection of fundamental freedoms of women and children, including on freedom of religion or belief. And the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, as an entity associated with ASEAN, is mandated as a knowledge hub to build capacity on conflict resolution, reconciliation, and strengthening of peace-oriented values in the region. As we know, over the past 10 years, the ICHA as a body has not undertaken any initiative on freedom of religion or belief until last year, where the ICHA representative from Indonesia, Ms. Yuyun, led a consultation on the implementation of Article 22 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And part of the important recommendations arising from this consultation include the development of counter-narrative to hate speech and violent extremism, and for the ICHA to issue human rights opinion or statement or advice on freedom of religion or belief by making use of the recommendation from the UPR process, general observation from treaty bodies, and also a national plan of action on human rights. As a general observation on the ICHR, we are aware that the ICHR, as a regional human rights body in ASEAN, has been subject to criticism, largely due to its lack of independence, strict adherence to non-interference principle, and also consensus decision-making. And it's also in light of the fact that most of the ICHR representatives have been undemocratically selected, and there had been mounting silence of the ICHR on human rights emergencies or a situation in the region. The ICHR has also been deemed to have a low level of protection ability and does not have the mandate to provide remedy on human rights violations. This is due to the fact that the ICHR does not have a communication procedure and also enforcement mechanism as it is in different continents of the world. The ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has also been subject to criticism, largely due to the fact that it falls below the international standard and the fact that it was developed with lack of consultation with civil society. Despite the current realities of the ICHR, we still think that the ICHR can do more by creatively using its existing mandate under the TOR to enhance freedom of religion or belief protection from within the ASEAN system. For instance, Mandate 4.10 of the TOR could actually be used to request information from concerned member states to address 4 emergencies and violations in the respective countries. Likewise, Mandate 4.1 could also be used to develop more strategies for freedom of religion or belief protection. And in addition, the ICHR needs to also enhance its engagement with parliamentarians, civil society, religious leaders, FBOs, and victims of violations. In the absence of a strong human rights mechanism in Southeast Asia, APHR and IPP4 have undertaken a joint project with a key objective to strengthen the roles of parliamentarians in promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief within their parliamentary functions, which include lawmaking, budgeting, and oversight. Parliamentarians are well placed to safeguard human rights, including through their roles as legislators, political party representatives, and also elected officials, especially in the ASEAN region, where widespread and systemic human rights violations have been prevalent. Under the framework of this project, we have set up a working group of 30 parliamentarians and politicians from 7 countries in Southeast Asia committed to freedom of religion or belief. We have undertaken various activities and advocacy, including fact-finding missions and policy dialogue, as advocacy platform for parliamentarians to engage with relevant stakeholders to address issues of intolerance and violations in Southeast Asia. We have also engaged in a number of legal and policy reform on freedom of religion or belief, including advocacy to end criminal resort to blasphemy and hate speech. We organize capacity building activities for MPs, undertake research, provide toolkits, policy analysis, recommendations, media output, and other advocacy documents for parliamentarians. With what we have accomplished during the past years, it could be humbly said that our joint project with the IPP4 has, to some extent, served as an alternative mechanism by transcending the limits of the status quo in ASEAN to address human rights violations in the region in view of ensuring redress and accountability. Together with the IPP4, we have made Vietnam as one of our top priority in terms of advocacy this year given the fact that Vietnam is currently chairing ASEAN in 2020. Yesterday, we issued a joint letter addressed to the Prime Minister of Vietnam. And we are pleased to inform you that the letter was signed by 65 parliamentarians from 28 countries from around the world. And the letter calls on the Prime Minister to immediately and unconditionally release Mr. Nguyen Bach Truyen and everyone who is currently in prison solely for the peaceful exercise of their human rights. And the letter also called on the Prime Minister to ensure that all religious organizations and groups are able to peacefully exercise the right to freedom of religion or belief and conduct religious activities freely, and that they are not threatened, tortured, or ill-treated, detained, or imprisoned for the peaceful practice of their faith. And finally, the letter also calls on the Prime Minister to ensure all domestic legislation addressing religious affairs, including the law on belief and religion that was previously mentioned by Dr. Shahid, is brought into conformity with international human rights law, including the ICCPR. In addition, APHR board member, who is a former Thai foreign minister and politician, Honorable Kasip Turomia, published his op-ed titled, "Why Are Peaceful Human Rights Activists Still Behind Bars in Vietnam?" And we also circulated additional materials to parliamentarians and other networks globally, including a briefer on COP situation in Vietnam and call for actions, including parliamentary questions to the respective government to increase international attention and pressure on this issue. And all this series of advocacy were done to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of Mr. Nguyen from being abducted by the Vietnamese authorities. So I was also asked to share a little bit about the Southeast Asia Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief, or the network of this that is set up out of this conference. One of the aims of the CFOP conference is to encourage the formulation of a country-specific movement. Right now, we have started the consolidation of a national network in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Myanmar. As for Indonesia, we have the momentum to host 2021 CFOP conference, and leading toward this process, we are organizing a series of webinars both at the national and regional level. CFOP Indonesia is also co-organizing a series of advocacy on blasphemy law by conducting a series of webinars looking at the state of freedom of religion or belief in Indonesia in general, the trend of blasphemy, international norms and practices related to blasphemy, where we will invite Dr. Shahid to speak, and comparative cross-regional experience on blasphemy. And this event will accumulate in the formulation of a policy brief and advocacy strategy to end blasphemy law, including its expansion under the current draft penal code of Indonesia. If I may share some insight from the CFOP Indonesia in terms of engagement with human rights instrument and mechanism, the movement in Indonesia was started with building coalition among key actors, including civil societies, national human rights institutions, legal aid foundation, faith-based organizations, including religious and belief communities. And the webinar is specifically directed to engage government authorities, including relevant ministries, parliamentarians, Office of Indonesian President, and also the UN mechanism and international expert on freedom of religion or belief, including Dr. Ahmad Shahid. And we will also look into comparative cross-regional experience, sharing with the EU and also the OIC to see how blasphemy has evolved, and we are particularly keen to see the development with regard to moratorium of blasphemy in some countries in different continents of the world. And finally, I would want to end my presentation by asking a question as to what more can we do to support freedom of religion or belief in Vietnam. If there are any suggestions for future advocacy that we can prioritize, and also whether do you think country visit is possible by fellow parliamentarians from the region? We would very much expect to sustain our advocacy beyond what we have already did in Vietnam. And with that, I will end my presentation and hand it back to Ambassador Glover. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. That was, I learned a lot, and I'm sure other participants did as well. And we will now proceed to our third panelist, to Greg Mitchell, and looking forward to your presentation, Greg. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Ambassador Reese. Let's see. All right, hoping my connection's good enough for my whole talk. I want to thank Dr. Tong and the whole Boat People SOS team for organizing this. Thanks again to Ambassador Reese. Thanks to my fellow panelists, Dr. Shahid. It's an honor to be part of this webinar and to be speaking on this panel with you all. So I chair as Ambassador Reese said, I chair the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, which is a multi-faith human rights mechanism focused on freedom of religion or belief and advancing for everybody on the planet. It's been around for about 10 years, almost 10 years. And we're based in Washington, D.C. And just real quick about the model, it's a multi-faith model, which means we pull together representatives of all faiths and none. So we have representatives of, the old and new, religions. We have atheists and humanists. Like, everybody is welcome. Traditional, non-traditional, whatever you want to call it. Everybody, it's inclusive. It's a multi-faith, like, radically inclusive model. As long as you're a peaceful faith community, you are welcome. And again, even those of no faith. And the whole purpose is to pull everybody together on a regular, ongoing basis and get everybody working together in multi-faith fashion, standing up for each other's freedom of religion or belief. And we get together on a weekly basis now. We get together with the U.S. government, Ambassador Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom. He meets with us on a regular weekly basis every Tuesday. Now, because of the coronavirus, we meet virtually every Tuesday, and everybody's welcome. And what we do is we share stories of persecution every single time we meet. And we probably have at least 8 to 10 stories of persecution every time we meet. And it becomes clear that every religion is being persecuted somewhere in the world. So it makes us all real to each other. So that increases mutual understanding and respect, which goes higher than tolerance, mutual understanding and respect. But then once we hear these stories, we focus on actions. What can we all do working together in multi-faith fashion? And we do multi-faith sign-on letters. We do multi-faith meetings. We'll resume those once in-person meetings can be happening again. We do multi-faith events, briefings, roundtables, like all of that, and even press events. But again, the purpose is to pull everybody together and get everybody of all faiths standing together, shoulder to shoulder. So we're speaking with one voice, and we're all asking for help for each other, standing up for each other. And government, like I said, Ambassador Brownback is there with us every week. And the U.S. government is there at every meeting, basically. So not only are we pulling all faiths together, but we're pulling civil society and government together. And then again, taking those actions over time, as we're all working together like that, it goes even stronger than understanding and respect, and it builds to mutual trust and reliance. So it's a really effective model. And the other thing I want to say is we break into working groups also. And we have the topic of this is human rights mechanisms and sanctions regimes. So we have a justice and accountability working group. So participants of our roundtable that are interested in working on sanctions to hold perpetrators accountable for their actions, their crimes against humanity, they gather on a regular basis to focus on specific countries and we solicit names of specific government officials that are responsible for the persecution. And then we launch multi-faith actions urging governments to sanction those government officials. And global Magnitsky sanctions, for instance. And we've been very successful so far at urging the U.S. government to sanction officials in China, for instance. And we're working with both People SOS and Tong and C4 to focus on Southeast Asia increasingly. So that gives you a little bit about our model. And the next thing is, we're going global with this. We really want to build a global network of these roundtables. Ideally, eventually, to set up a religious freedom roundtable or 4 roundtable in every country. In fact, our weekly meetings, because they're virtual, they're increasingly global now. We've had over 700 participants from close to 50 countries participating in our weekly virtual roundtables. But that, again, our next action is to link roundtables around the world and get them communicating with each other on a regular basis and then coordinating actions on a regular basis. So it's not just multi-faith actions coming out of Washington, D.C. or the West. We want to have roundtables in every region. And we want to set up regional secretariats that would help set up roundtables in each country, in each of the regions where we set up a regional secretariat. So we look forward to working with C4 and to help us set up roundtables in Southeast Asia. And I know that some efforts are already underway, so we want to hook up and partner with those who are already working in this direction and working on this issue in Southeast Asia. And then we also want to coordinate not only within the civil society network, but we want to coordinate with other global networks that are working on this issue. So we want to look forward to coordinating actions with the International Religious Freedom Alliance, which is the government alliance, and we want to increase our coordination with the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and look forward to increasing our coordination with the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, because it's all about increasing our reach and increasing our influence over government policies and practices, so that we reduce, the amount of persecution against peaceful religious communities and individuals, and as much as we can. Like if we have roundtables all over the world and we're coordinating, we have justice and accountability working groups around the world. We can more effectively use the sanctions mechanisms to hold individual government officials responsible for the crimes they're perpetrating against humanity and individuals. So I'll leave it there, and I'm open for questions. And thank you very much.
Every time. There's a slight delay while we unmute ourselves every time. But thank you so much. Thanks so much to all 3 of our panelists for these wonderfully informative and insightful presentations. I would like to add one thing very briefly to Greg's presentation, which is that there is an International Religious Freedom Roundtable in Vietnam. Unfortunately, the special circumstances of Vietnam and a very small number of other countries, primarily ex-communist countries or present communist countries they've given up the idealistic parts of Marxism and kept the rest. They still have a rule that you can only be a non-governmental organization if you're organized by the government. And therefore, the participants in the International Roundtable would be regarded by the government as illegal, almost all of them, because almost all, a genuinely independent religious organization, a genuinely independent non-governmental organization is by definition illegal in Vietnam. And so we have to work within that framework. We don't want to ignore these people and leave them hanging. And therefore, we have to operate in a different way than we would in a country where maybe there's a problem with persecution of religion, but at least the religious rights groups are allowed to exist. And perhaps we'll get questions along those lines. We do have some questions from the audience. And the first one, I believe, is from Mr. Tran Ngoc Soong. And I think we have a webcam coming up for him. Is that right?
He will be speaking live. He's present in the audience.
Okay. Present in the physical audience. I didn't even know we had a physical audience. Okay. So
I will light him up.
Can we have the first question then?
Yes, here he is. I, Trần Ngọc Sương, Chairman of the Executive Committee of Parish, Cao Đài Religion, 1926, greatly appreciated Dr. Shahid for having sent a letter to the Vietnamese government regarding the fact that I was forbidden from leaving for a religious freedom conference in Thailand last year. The Vietnamese government has not responded to this letter. On the contrary, they have tolerated blogs and Facebook pages to openly defame me. At the same time, the Cao Đài sect created by the government in 1997 and currently occupying our holy see of our religion, issue a decree excommunicating me. Ironically, I embraced the Cao Đài faith 23 years before the communists established this sect. I filed a complaint in court against this sect for violating my freedom of religion under the law on belief and religion, and against those who maintain the web pages for the blogs and Facebook pages for violating the law on cybersecurity. Please pay attention to this so that the Vietnamese government will comply with their own law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now that was a statement by a victim of religious persecution in Vietnam, more than a question. But if any of if Dr. Shahid or either of our other two panelists would like to respond, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we have time for a brief response.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rees. And for the question too, yes, very briefly, yes, I am very concerned about the issue you have raised and the situation you are facing. And of course, the government's failure to reply is a problem. I shall, of course, be following up with other rapporteurs on this subject to see what we can do as a response to its failure to report. And I'll see what governments who work on this area can also do to help in your particular case. We will not leave this subject, but we will remain in support of your situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we now have a question. I understand it's from Ms. Bui T. Kim Phung, and that question will be asked in Vietnamese and will also be interpreted.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yes.
Phượng mở mic lên nói đi em.
Did I hear Michelle Nguyen? You're going to interpret? Will she ask the question in Vietnamese first, or have you already got the interpretation?
She will make a statement first, and I will interpret for her.
Okay, great. In law school, in addition to studying freedom of religion, I should have studied more computer science, and we'd be quicker and better at this.
It looks like she's having a difficulty. The organizer, can you please show the video clip instead?
Will do.
Hello?
Yeah, we'll play a video of her statement.
Okay. Standing by.
And while waiting for the video, this is Tom here. We make it the practice to pre-record videos of statements from Vietnam, because in the past we have experienced situations where the internet service got cut and all the phone lines are also cut. So we have learned from that experience. So we come ready.
Thank you. While we're waiting for the organizer, I would like to introduce Ms. Phương. She's the wife of the religious prisoner Nguyễn Bắc Truyện, and she's so honored and grateful that her husband received a very tireless advocacy for his freedom. So she just would like to say a few words, especially in light of the letter that's signed by 65 parliamentarians around the world.
I'd like to add this for Greg. This is Tong again. Mr. Truyện was your counterpart. He was the convener of the Vietnam Fourth Roundtable and is now in prison serving an 11 years sentence. So I think that we need to show solidarity here.
Mr. Truyện was a long-time worker on social services, not just for religious freedom, but for all kinds of health and poverty and so forth, working primarily through Catholic organizations. But he himself is a Hoa Hao Buddhist, a member of a small and very much persecuted sect that is indigenous to Vietnam.
Yeah, and this is Greg. Yeah, see this is the kind of global coordination that we want to see more of, where the International Panel of Parliamentarians sent a letter on his behalf, and now our roundtable is working on a letter. We're gathering signatures on a letter to send, and we'll ask other roundtables in our global network to do the same, so that we're getting letters going from all continents and all regions on the same topic and to the same government, to see if we can increase our impact on them and actually persuade them to do the right thing.
And also,
we have only 10 minutes left. We have only 10 minutes left,
yes.
And I'm seeing an error message on the screen. So if Michelle, if you have a brief summary of the statement by Ms. Phương, it might be best to proceed to that and then to proceed, because we have at least 3 or 4 other questions.
Yes, I agree, and I apologize. I will read the statement, and then we can send the video clips to Desi later, and you can forward to everyone's involved. Thank you. My name is Bùi Thị Kim Phượng. I am the wife of religious prisoner Nguyễn Bắc Truyện. On behalf of my family and my husband, I wish to express my most sincere gratitude to Ms. Desi Hanara, the Asian Parliamentarians for Human Rights, and the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief for sending the joint letter to urge Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc to release my husband. Thank you so much for your dedicated and tireless efforts to campaign for my husband's freedom. I send you my heartfelt thanks, respectfully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Desi Hanara, for your wonderful work and the wonderful work of your organization. I would like to proceed to the next question, which I understand is from a Catholic priest at the Tien An Monastery, which is experiencing persecution primarily from government-affiliated mobs. Do we have a clip of that, or just the interpretation? If we have a video clip, or if we have an in-person link to the priest or the father who is in Vietnam, we can. I would ask the technical team to connect it now. Otherwise, perhaps we can just go to the interpretation.
Joseph, go ahead and skip to the next question. We get the update that he cannot participate and did not send a statement in time.
Okay, well, we will proceed to the next, and that often is not for technical reasons, but for government-related reasons. And so we will all say a prayer for the priests and the faithful at the Tien An Monastery. And so the next question, I understand, and I'm supposed to read the question. It's from an organization called veto, a Vietnamese, primarily run by Vietnamese exiles in Europe. And the question is for Dr. Shahid, and it is, what do you do with the reports you receive, and which criteria do you use to decide when to take actions? To encourage victims to submit updates about their situation, can you share the progress of your intervention? And I guess that means, as a general practice, can you share the progress of your interventions with those who petitioned you to make them? Dr. Shahid?
Thank you very much. A very useful question. Yes, as a general procedure, I can share with those affected the progress of the intervention. This would normally be in the form of letting them know I've written to the government concerned, and letting them know if the government has responded in any specific fashion. And then if the time has lapsed, I'll also work with the person concerned to see what other steps can be taken. It's important that I do my work with the consent of the person affected, so that I ensure that I use their judgment as to what is the most effective, in addition to what other things I can bring into to bear upon this. The main criteria is to receive a report that appears to be credible. In other words, that provides specific details as to what happened to whom, where, and to what extent, and so on. Enough specifics to know that there is a specific violation involved here, and to have it come directly from the person concerned, or their lawyer, or their family, or somebody who could speak legitimately for that person. And then, of course, if depending on the nature of the allegation, the kind of evidence I require to take up the case may vary. But generally, I use a very general, a reasonable standard, a standard of reasonableness as to see whether or not this could have occurred. So I will be taking up a lot of cases that might not perhaps be taken up in a court of law due to evidentiary requirements, but I have a much lower threshold. So that's my basic way of operating. And after that, I can also include these in reports to the UN. So it gets passed up the chain. And then finally, I also take up, with the consent of the person concerned, with other envoys and governments who would weigh in favor of the work I am doing in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I understand the next question is from Tian Yuan. Who will...
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Question for Dr. Shahid. The Vietnamese government interprets belief in freedom of religion or belief in a very narrow manner when translating Article 18 of the International Convention Covenant on Civil and Political Rights into Vietnamese. Here's how they translated it. Belief means a person's faith which is expressed through rites, associated rites, R-I-T-S, associated with traditional customs and habits, in order to bring spiritual peacefulness to individuals and communities. The deeper meaning, okay, here's what our view is on that translation. The deeper meaning of belief, i.e. faith or something like that, was ignored in the official translation of the covenant. So the unsaid thing is that the law on religion and belief does not say anything about protecting the right to be true to one's faith. What can you do about this?
Thank you very much. That's a very important and pertinent question. You will see this raised by the Human Rights Committee when they last reviewed Vietnam in 2019. This point is raised in the last report by Yusuf, as well as in the report by my predecessor, Heiner Bielefeld, when we went there. And the key point we raise is that the law in the country, like you said, does not meet the standards set up in Article 18 of the ICCPR. And the guidance we encourage on the government of Vietnam, as other governments, is to follow the detail given in General Comment 22 by the Human Rights Committee, to make it as broad as possible, to make belief as inclusive as possible without actually defining limits of that. And of course, I think if the Human Rights Committee, if the UPR, if other governments, including the IRFA, the US has launched, and the Canadian Contact Group and others, if we keep on raising the question that Vietnam ought to ensure protections are given to freedom of thought, conscience, or belief, I think we need to keep doing that. I mean, the underlying concern here is as Ambassador Rees mentioned, in countries coming out of communism or still within the communist fold, there's a lot of state patriarchy with regard to who can be independent, who can operate in the civic space. This is a basic issue here. The Vietnamese law on public order, Vietnamese law on national security, they presume that everyone is a suspect before they can actually come out and operate. So it requires, I think, literacy in terms of what human rights in this field are, literacy in regard to Article 18, and as Heiner Bielefeld notes, this becomes a bigger problem in the non-urban areas than in the urban areas. So I think there is a need to invest in literacy in FOB and literacy in human rights education with regard to what the article means. And of course, all of us in this space today to keep on pressing that Vietnam does not meet its core minimum obligations under Article 18 in the way the law is currently framed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I understand that we do have a question from Tien An Monastery, and that it will be delivered by Mr. Huang, who I think is not actually at the monastery, but is in touch with them. Can we have the interpretation, please?
Yes, this time I will try to ad-lib here. Very quickly, the summary is that Mr. Huang, who's now in Thailand, a refugee in Thailand, he's speaking on behalf of the priest at the monastery, Tien An Monastery, that got attacked again. This is not the first time. It has happened many times over the past few years. As the government of Hue, Thien Hue province, tried to expropriate land and property of the monastery, the members, the priests there, have tried to resist that. And recently, since 2017, the government has been using organized mobs to attack the monastery. And you can see in the pictures here, they desecrate the religious symbol. This is not the first time. They have been doing that multiple times. And coming along with the mob, people could see some of the cadres, some of the government officials supporting them. And the call for help from the monastery has been ignored by the government. So they are asking everyone to pray for the monastery, to pay attention to this developing situation that just happened. The picture here is just 2 days ago in Vietnam. And since 22nd of August will be the International Day commemorating victims of violence on the basis of religious belief. So pray for the monastery. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for the information, and thank you, Dr. Tang, for the interpretation. We have passed our scheduled time, but I would like to ask each of our speakers if he or she has a brief closing summary, either in response to that question or to other questions, or just general closing remarks. I'd like you to keep it to 60 seconds apiece if you can. And we will start with Dr. Shahid.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for that question, and also for other questions as well. I think it's very good to remember that we have the anniversary coming 22nd August to remember the victims of violence based on gender belief. And on that day, to remember of all the violence occurring everywhere, including in Vietnam, and use that opportunity to mobilize all of us to pray for those who are being persecuted, and also to show other ways solidarity for those who are affected. And also to mobilize ourselves to ensure that perpetrators know that we are watching them, that we will document their violations, and that we would also, at some point when we can, hold them to account. And that possibility is increasing as more and more governments are becoming more focused on ensuring that they hold perpetrators to account. So thank you very much for the questions. and for the time given to me to speak this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hanara.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the wife of Mr. Truyan for the heartfelt message, but I would like to reiterate that it was a collective work between APHR and IPP4, and it's the global commitment of the parliamentarians. Because of that, it was possible. So thanks to all those involved. It's not only my own work. So I just would like to reiterate it. And also, we are very much looking forward to work beyond BPSOS. If there's any network in Vietnam that we could be connected to, or to explore any potential country visit to see the real situation in Vietnam with regard to this issue, that would be very much appreciated. We would always welcome your suggestion. And thank you again for having us.
Thank you. And Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks, Ambassador Reese. Yeah, I just want to thank Dr. Tong and the Boat People SOS team again. They're one of the most active participants in the International Religious Freedom Roundtable in Washington. Yeah, and Tong, he was one of the first, setting up the roundtable, the Vietnam roundtable. It was one of the first ones. I think there was one in Europe, and then Tong setting it up in Vietnam, and those were the first two outside of Washington in the global network. So we just look forward to continuing our efforts with you all, and again look forward to continuing our coordination, with Dr. Shahid and his team, with Desi and your network, with the Earth Alliance, and with IPP4. So I'm honored to be part of this panel and look forward to working with you all into the future, and hopefully we can start scoring more victories so that we can open up freedom for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all again for the wonderful presentations. Thanks to the questioners. Thank you. Terima kasih banyak. I don't know what they say in the Maldives, perhaps Sukriya or Sukran Jazilan.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And Kam An Ong Ba Nyu Lang. We will proceed now to the next to the next panel. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Reese.
Thank you, Ambassador. I will see you soon.
Yes, indeed. Thanks. Signing off now.
Me too.